Hang on deck. What's up, fam?
What's up,
Right.
Dave?
What's going on?
I don't know if I've had the pleasure, Dave. Have we met before?
No, sir, we have not.
All right.
I am Dave Martel. I notorious troll, podcaster, jerk off. I am also a follower of the path of Asatru and the Odinic philosophy.
Sure.
And I actually have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
Now, I watched your discussion with Mr. McNallen, who is a guy that I've been following for many, many years. I've read his books. Some of his students, Mr. Brian Wilton. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Mr. McNallen a little bit. And, first of all, I thought you were going to be a douchebag, and you actually, you were respectful to him. And you and Mr. Spencer had a reverence because he is a great man. And you guys proved me wrong on that. I thought I was going to go in there. I was expecting to get really mad, and I didn't really get that mad. So, but I do want to clear up because I didn't quite understand. I read your article and I watched your discussion, but I still don't quite understand how you come up with the theory that Vodanas or Odin is of Semitic roots. Could you give me a short, succinct description of this theory?
Yeah, well, it's because of similarities in Norse mythology that are clearly, in my mind, referential to the Hebrew Bible and also referential to the New Testament.
Okay, real quick,
sure.
Before we go any further, how is it that Odin would have roots in Semitism or Semitic culture or philosophy or whatever if he existed before that?
I don't think that he did exist before that, is what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, Mr. McNallen pointed out that there've been, there's depictions of Odin on cave paintings that are who knows how old.
There's depictions of a guy with a spear on cave paintings. I mean,
but even that, just the concept of Votan, it goes back even further. Vodanas, the concept of Vodanas, the god Vodanas, existed in Teutonic society.
The name, so far as it's traceable, does not predate Christianity.
Absolutely.
So he's not a deity that predates Christianity, is what I'm saying.
No, so what I'm saying is you're wrong, because it's in fact Vodanas, Odin.
You're talking about runes. You're talking about
no. I'm talking that gets into a whole other thing. If you want to talk about runes, that's a whole completely different discussion. We can untangle that on a different discussion. But we're talking about the deity, the All-Father Odin, or as the Saxons called him, Woden or Vodanas. He's existed.
Mr. Wednesday. It's good. It's a good name, Mr. Wednesday.
He's existed for many years throughout many different societies and many different tribes, and he's existed even during the times of ancient Rome and who knows how far back. But he absolutely, without a doubt, predates Christianity and Judaism.
So I think if I'm understanding you correctly, you're describing a kind of general celestial deity who is an Aryan celestial deity, effectively, right?
Yeah, well, a Germanic deity. That has its roots in Proto-Indo-European.
I don't dispute the idea that Aryan tribes honored some sort of general celestial deity. I don't dispute that idea.
Well, that kind of like muddies up the whole thing. We're talking about Odin, who goes by many names throughout many different Germanic cultures, not just Aryan, Germanic cultures. Now, if you want to talk about going back further, like Proto-Indo-European, there's most of the gods are also found in their dogma as well. For example,
I would have to see what you're referencing, what you're talking about now. I'd have to take a look at it. But my argument is that Norse mythology, as we understand it now, is clearly derivative of and referential to the New Testament and the Hebrew Bible, and certainly in all its kind of important and sophisticated elements.
That's absolutely false. Show me some evidence that supports that.
Well, one example is Thor's contest with the Midgard serpent. You read my article, right?
Yeah.
All right. So his that in my mind is clearly referential to the Jewish gods contest with Leviathan that also happens during the apocalypse, right?
Yeah.
So-
But Christianity has a story about the deluge. So do the Babylonians and the Sumerians and the Chinese. Does that mean that Christianity is Chinese or
No, but
Babylonian?
it does mean that the flood that occurs in the Hebrew Bible is all derived from earlier cultures. Certainly, I mean, there is a flood in the Sumerian culture that is clearly what's being referenced or is being copied in the Hebrew Bible, for example.
So you're saying Christianity is a copied religion?
Christianity. I'm not saying I'm saying it's derivative of other religions, but I don't think it's you missed the kind of first part of our discussion.
But what you're saying is that many different cultures are depicting the same event or the same idea.
Yeah, but they're consciously referencing it, right? So in other words, it's not that people are just kind of coming up with the same idea spontaneously in a kind of Jungian manner. They're consciously referencing motifs that appear in earlier mythology.
So how is it, let's go back to Odin, because that's the main concept. You still haven't provided any real evidence besides, I kind of feel there's a correlation in my mind. There's no actual hard evidence. So why is it you keep...
You heard my discussion with McNallen?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the nature of our conversation that there isn't hard evidence. You would have to agree, right? So, I mean, if you prefer to believe that he's an Aryan god, there's nothing I can do about it. But to my mind, he's clearly kind of a magician archetype. He is clearly very similar, and I would argue derived from the figure of Mercury or Hermes, right? And Mercury is a deceiver. He's the god of deceivers. Odin is also a trickster god. He's a magician and a deceiver. What?
Also false. If you want to talk about
this is borne out pretty clearly in the myths. I mean, for example, he's often disguised. He disguises himself as a human.
All of the gods do.
What?
All of the gods do.
All of the gods in Norse mythology do.
All of the gods have, not all of them, but a great many of them have stories where they, change form, or and it's a constant theme that Odin or Vodin is consistently walking with us in real life, in real time. Our gods are living gods.
Well, so one other example is the that he is a soul god, right? And this is something that McNallen conceded, that he actually conceded that there were kind of striking similarities between the two deities, and this was the reason the Romans identified Odin as Mercury. So one of the similarities is that he's a soul god, or a psychopomp, as McNallen put it, and that he is Valhalla. He brings souls to Valhalla. And this is a role shared by Mercury and Hermes in the Greco-Roman pantheon.
Well, every polytheistic religion has a god that takes his souls to another plane. In fact, if you read the Eddas, it says that Freya actually has first pick for who gets to go to the next world. If you go back further to Alpine Germanic tradition, the mother of the mountain Hola comes up actually literally in there, they say, through a hole to grab your soul and take you to the underworld. There's so many stories throughout, not just Germanic, but every single mythology has a story where a celestial deity comes and takes souls to a heaven or another plane. So to say that just because these two gods and these two mythologies, that correlation is causation, it's kind of ridiculous.
Well, what happens is that these religions and myths are referencing earlier religions and myths, right? They're not kind of developing. They're not developing spontaneously. So that would be my answer to it. So of course they're going to contain similar elements, because at some point they have at some like sort of final origin, they have a similar and final shared origin.
There is a convergence, and between Germanic, Slavic, you go through all of the kind of mainland European mythologies, including Roman and Greek and all of that. All of them hail from Proto-Indo-European mythology, which we now know, or we now think, or we believe that the furthest back culture we can trace were called the Yamnaya people that existed on the Caspian steppe region of the Ukraine. We believe them to be the kind of the forefather of all of our spiritual philosophies, and even going out and being the forefather of the dharmic religions as well. So yeah, you're right. There is a convergence far way back, and there's an origin route. But to think that just to say that, oh, there's these similarities, therefore Jews, is just like it's crazy.
The jump to the Semitic is where I think that the disconnect happens. I don't think that anybody's arguing that obviously regional religions that are close in proximity and over time are going to have some bleed in. They're going to, because a lot of times they feed back to, a small group of tribes that, especially after we came out of a fucking ice age. People were in these smaller tribes. They're going to have similar stories. And as those spread out, like you said, the flow of language is the same way, where those things are going to flow out and they're going to change and alter over time as these groups become further and further apart. But I think that the part where people have a disconnect from your theory that you're putting forth is, where does the Jewish element come in?
Well, let me answer that. I mean, I have to answer it by using specific examples. So let's take the figure of Balder, who mythographers very commonly associate with Adonis and Christ. We see there that, obviously Christ is a Jewish figure. Adonis also, though, is a Jewish or proto-Jewish figure. Now, the reason we know this is that he is clearly a Semitic god, right? This is well established. He's a Semitic god. He's a Phoenician god. The name is retained actually in Judaism. That was one of the names for God in Judaism is Adonai, right? This is a reference to Adonis. Now, a rabbi won't admit this, but etymologically, it's clear. And mythographers understand this to be the case. And then before that, we have this god, or at the same time, we have this god, Tamazu, and he's the same god. He's also a Semitic god. He's understood as a Semitic god. So
maybe you need to define what you mean by Semitic god. So they came out of these Sumer tribes. Is that? Are we going back?
No, I'm just saying. Well, I'm saying that. I'm saying that you can see more or less a straight line between a figure like Adonis or Christ and the figure of Balder. And his probably his nearest inspiration is in my mind, it's clearly the figure of Christ, because we have this kind of apocalypse that's like Ragnarok, and we see that in the New Testament, right, with Revelation. So So my answer is that Balder is clearly derived from Christ. That's what I would say,
based on zero evidence.
Well, let's put that aside for a second.
Well, I think I presented evidence.
No, well, okay, but what I'm saying is that that's the same example that's given. So there's one example, and maybe you have two or three, but you're talking about pantheons of gods, and then kind of to flesh that out a little further. So if all of the Europeans from all, especially northern, northwestern, even going into the northeast, share similar gods, but not the same, where they are clearly, some type of derivative from each other. That means that this just Jewish element would have, and you're saying it's post-Christian. So that means that post-Christian, we would have had to have some Jews go in and make up and craft a story for each one of these European tribes in all of these different sectors that were similar, but not the same, and crafted specifically for those people. And all those people that their further generations converted and all that, the people that have kept traditions, that all their writings, they would have had to just magically had these Jew stories infiltrated into their existence.
Well, the transmission, it's again, you admit that there is a common origin, and these myths are derived from one another, right? And I argue that they're consciously referential of one another, because that they're intelligently developed. I think that the Norse myth, for example, is a very kind of clever, intricate, intelligent development. I think that it's a very kind of brilliant thing. I think the I think the New Testament is brilliant. I think a lot of these things I mean, they're brilliant as what I would call forms of propaganda, essentially. And the way that you would convert barbarians to Christianity is you wouldn't convert them, or you would convert them to a Jewish God. Is you wouldn't convert them through Christianity. Okay? The Christianity clearly they would be uninterested in, and that's shown. Our understanding of these Vikings is that they initially rejected Christianity, of course, and so there comes this other kind of brand of religion, Norse mythology, which they do accept, and it has all these kind of similarities. So it's kind of a starter set, as it were. You know what I'm saying? And that becomes a way of kind of acclimating them for Christianity. So
they go in and they convert them to this go through all the trouble of turning them into this new religion for who knows. Hold on. For no purpose. Okay, yeah, but
they did that with
Christianity. No, I get you. I agree with you. Hold on, let me flesh it out here. I agree with you. But Christianity is still around and is practiced by billions of people today. Why would you go in and convert these people? And you can't just say Norse mythology, because it was through all of these other peoples. So either it had the time to transmit naturally once they injected it into these Germanic people, and then it went up into the Norse mythology and then spread out and went all these people just for them. And this all happened, and they came to wipe them out within a handful of generations. Really, the Roman Church formed up and started making pushing in there not that long after. So it seems like a lot of work for no purpose.
It's not. Well, I mean, the introduction of this is what we're talking about, I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong. The introduction of, and who knows actually when German tribes started adopting Norse mythology in any kind of form that we would find familiar today, right? With kind of the myths.
Your timeline's messed up. Messed up.
Yeah, it's the other way around.
The Norse mythology was sort of the last manifestation of the Germanic theology. It was like the last one. You had it for thousands of years. You had Germanic mythology that the Norse myth came from, and that's my point. Is that the Germanic the Germanic theology, the Germanic myth, has been around much longer than Christianity, or even like you could say monotheism before Jews were even a thing. Like it's so to say that it has Semitic roots is just I would prefer you to say this is why I came in here firing. This is why everybody got a little upset, because number one, your timeline's messed up. Number two, you don't have any evidence at all. There's zero evidence, and it's impossible because it's like your timeline's completely backwards and mixed up like some fucked up Pulp Fiction movie. And then it's like, and then you kind of add in the Semitic thing. It's kind of like you're kind of accusing us of ripping off Jews, so it's like that's why it comes off as abrasive.
All right, listen. I know it's abrasive, and I honestly, personally, I mean, you seem like a great guy, and I like you, and I probably like most of the people that got pissed at me. Some of them I probably don't, because they might be not good people. But so I'm not doing this to trigger people. Just so you understand, right? This is kind of a conclusion that I've reached based on an evaluation of the evidence.
I would say your title for the article you wrote is counter to what you're saying now, because
it was a little. Look, I admit that I was a little. Look, I got a little whatever. It was a little edgy. I agree.
Because there's a lot of other ways you could have worded that wouldn't have been so.
Well, but the only thing I'll say in response to that, Rory, is that Jewish esoteric moralization is a concept. It's a term that basically describes a phenomena. I hate to be that direct, but it's a term that essentially describes a phenomena.
But you could say it the same way that you worded it here, where you could say, Norse mythology has roots in, Semitic, or it's rooted from Semitic gods, right? You could have worded it in a lot of different ways where people would still disagree with you, but it wouldn't have came off so abrasive.
Yeah,
You're right. I put a little too much mustard on the
A
ball.
little bit of sauce on it. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, part of it is I write in a very rhetorical manner. I got to be honest with you. I write in a very rhetorical manner, but I'm actually not as much as a dick as I sound when I'm writing. But writing in a rhetorical manner is effective in conveying ideas, and I mean, the ideas themselves, though, are ideas that I've carefully scrutinized. So I'm not just throwing bullshit up. I mean, you guys, that might be your.
Yeah, I would argue there's no evidence. There's no evidence. There's no evidence. The timeline is completely wrong.
I've given you my evidence based on the similarity of these myths, right? I find it
That's not
compelling
evidence.
these myths, and I see that because of the similarity of these myths, it seems like a logical conclusion that there is continuity between these myths.
Yeah.
So that is my evidence. I think that there is. I think that there is no evidence on your side.
So my cave paintings, which is physical possible evidence, is no good. But you're kind of vague, esoteric, out in stream of consciousness, tying two similarities together. That's the real deal, bro.
Wait, your cave paintings have nothing to do with the prose Edda and the poetic Edda.
It absolutely. If it is indeed Odin, then yeah, it does. But the reason that gets used as evidence is because that's the furthest back we could possibly go. That's the furthest back we could possibly go to know. Who knows? It could be. I personally believe that it's been around a much longer. And in fact, if you understand the cyclical nature of Asatru and of Germanic myth, you would know. Like we were talking about the Teutonic peoples and the Proto-Indo people and stuff like that. Odin wasn't always the chief god, and in fact, Tyr was the chief god. Our day Tuesday is named after the Teutonic god Tiw, Tiw, who is actually derived from the Proto-Indo-European god Deus Pater, which means like the heavenly father or the sky father. So a lot of people believe there's a lot of theories that in the Voluspa, when we're talking about the creation myth, and we're talking about Odin, Villig, and Ve coming out for the whole big thing, that it's really they're describing the gods beating back the ice age, the Pleistocene or the Holocene, I can't remember which one, but they beat back the ice age and brought into fruition the golden age where the sun was warm and stuff like that.
I don't mean to derail this, but there's no evidence, Dave, that the Holocene happened.
Okay, well, yeah, that's a whole other discussion, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you.
I know. This is very heavy stuff, and I'm still hung up on us using cave paintings as evidence. Not that it's not perfectly valid evidence, but I'm just Your Honor, I submit for this. Submit the Exhibit A, this cave painting. This is fun. I'm really enjoying it. You don't get enough.
I don't think I got an answer to my question earlier.
Well, the reason that we don't sort of recognize the Holocene is because that's the epic we're currently in, and so to name it, you can't name an epic until after it's happened.
You're a Holocene denier.
I am a
No, I'm just a science guy, man.
But one thing I wanted to clarify about the timeline thing, I think Mark means that the only way that we know as much as we know about Norse mythology is through the church. So that's why he's placing that timeline as, the Norse mythology is referential to Christianity. And not by, originally we view, the pagan religions that we're talking about as having come before, Judaism and Christianity. But what he's saying is that we've only had that interpretation of them through the church.
Let me just quickly follow up on that, just so I can make my point or my kind of position on this clear. I mean, I think that the earliest runestone we have is 4th century AD, right? But there is no real kind of clear record as to exactly what Norse religion was. I mean, when it kind of comes into focus and becomes clear is when it is, as Ed was pointing out, when it's presented through the church in the 13th century through the prose Edda and the poetic Edda. I mean, that's how we know about Norse mythology. Now, how much of it was kind of created around that time, how much of it existed prior to that time, no one really knows, But what is known is that, and these could even be generous datings, the earliest runestone appears in the 4th century. right? So, I just, there's no evidence that Norse mythology existed earlier than that. In my mind.
because the Norse people didn't really exist before that. The point is that they did exist before that, but the Norse people living in Scandinavia don't go back thousands of years. We're not talking back in BC times there was Scandinavians there. That's not true. What we're talking about is that Odin, the deity Odin, has been worshipped in many, many different Germanic cultures throughout history, and that's a fact. And that goes back way further than any Jewish or Christian history, and it goes all the way back to Teutonic culture during like ancient Roman shit.
You're saying under different names, a kind of archetype that is Odinic existed through all cultures. Is that what you're saying?
No, not the archetype, but the deity himself has existed and has been worshipped by Germanic peoples across many different Germanic tribes throughout history for thousands of years. It was just he's just had a different name.
What is the record for that? There's no record for that though.
Yeah, I actually believe that Odin or Vodinas is mentioned in Tacitus. Let me look it up. It's been a long time since I read Tacitus.
Well, I mean that still sets a date that is not, that doesn't necessarily predate Christianity.
Ancient Rome doesn't predate Christianity.
Ancient Rome does, but Tacitus doesn't predate Christianity.
So, okay, so let me just clarify, because maybe I'm missing something here. So I get what you're saying. So you're saying that, and I'm glad you cleared that up, because from what you wrote, that's not actually clear.
I'll have to add that then.
Yeah, because I think because the way it comes off is you're saying that the religion that Proto-Europeans and the actual Norse people and the Germanic people of Northern Europe and Northwest Europe were worshiping something that was Semitic in that time. What you're actually saying is the interpretation that we know today is created as a Semitic archetype, right?
Well,
just to clarify.
I mean, to the latter, yes, I definitely to the latter. To the former, we don't know exactly what it was, right? Now,
that's what I'm saying. I'll even give that to you just for the sake of argument, just to clarify this point. Even if it's something completely different than we know today, right? So we have no way of knowing, but I don't see why there would be any reason that it would be Semitic. Is what I'm
well, there are a couple of clues, and one of the clues is that according to the Roman interpretation, they viewed the German god as Mercury, right? They identified him with Mercury. Now, Mercury is a Semitic god. This is clear, right? And I established this in my writing. Hermes or Mercury, he's the son of a Oread, which is this kind of mountain goddess, a kind of vague equivalent of a Jewess, right? And he's the god of thieves. He's the god of liars. He's the god of deceivers. He's a merchant. He's the god of merchants. So the Roman interpretation is indicating this German god is a Semitic god. So that's one clue.
Okay. So you are, that's where it becomes a little sketchy on. So because the
Romans are probably the most reliable people we have during that period.
No, I know, I get that. But what I'm saying is so then that goes to so you're saying that there were Semitic, pretty much Jew secret agent spies going out and seeding this through all of Europe, and then not only just all of Europe, but all of Asia, and then as well as the Americas. That's true.
Rory, I mean, I got to be honest. I don't know exactly what happened, right? I mean, I don't think anyone knows exactly what happened. But one theory of transmission would be you have essentially Jews, who become, who are merchants, who are interacting, and through a kind of shamanic cult, they introduce this religion to Germanic tribes, right? And the reason why we wouldn't be surprised about this is that we know that Jews are very active in history in actively trying to convert, Aryan peoples or peoples in general to religions, including Christianity and then later Islam.
So how does
and
the spread
the
go
religions that
into-
they authored and developed, right?
Yeah.
So I mean that's what I would say. And I mean no one can know really, right?
So how does that spread into the majority of Asia? It seems
To
like
the
a big
majority. What are you talking about?
Well, you have, all the Indian religions, the whole, there's the whole Indo-European connection. So
Yeah, I gave you
Th-
my theory on kind of how civilizations develop and how they decline.
Yeah.
You understand.
no, I get that. So I'm just trying to kind of flesh this out to make sure I'm fully
Sure. Yeah.
understanding. So this means that this would have had to been seeded within these cultures quite early on for it to kind of spread naturally into this organic delineation that we see throughout these religions. Couldn't have been much
I think
later.
I think in a lot of cases that is the case, right? Again, I think that Jews are experts at developing art, propaganda, and religion, and so this does occur relatively early after the kind of the establishment of a civilization, right?
But how'd they do it before they existed, though?
Before who existed?
The Jews.
Well, so I argue that there are proto-Jews, right? That's my argument, that they're proto-Jews, because at some point in history, Jews are absent, right? When Herodotus is writing his histories, he doesn't mention Jews. So I argue that there are proto-Jews, and that is kind of the earliest manifestation of these proto-Jews occurs in Sumer, right? Especially in the cult of Dumazid in Inanna. That becomes a kind of founding cult potentially for Judaism.
So wouldn't it make a lot more sense that the Jews didn't exist, and when they really formed into kind of an ethnic group, they were pulling from myths that existed before them, and just like everyone else? Wouldn't that make a lot more sense than proto-Jews sprinkled fantasy myths all over the place?
No, so let me respond to that, Rory. The reason I think the proto-Jews is more likely is because, again, Jews. So there's another kind of part of my thesis that I'll describe, and it's this idea of the similarity of the ancients. Now, Jews are a people that I perceive as being unchanged in a way that other peoples have essentially changed. For example, in India, I mean, that's clearly not the kind of founding population of India. That at some point that became a darker race in India, whereas Jews have kind of retained a sort of racial integrity or kind of an identity, and have remained a kind of a racial type through this whole time, right? Now,
no, not really. Like,
well,
what?
that's my theory. So my theory is the similarity of the ancients, and so proto-Jews are found in cults in the ancient world, effectively. So they can be identified in cults in the ancient world. One of the examples that I use in my writing is the cult of Vulcan, right? And I explicate this in my writing, and maybe I'll publish that. Anyways, if people have questions, I'll publish writings pertinent to those questions. I may not be able to explicate everything, but for example, actually, let me get here's a simpler one, because this is actually clearly a proto-Jewish cult that's actually been identified, right? So this idea of a proto-Jewish cult is actually already kind of verified. The coinage of the word proto-Jew might actually be mine used in this context. But in Crete, for example, right? There Tacitus remarks that the name of the Jews, he thinks, is derived from Mount Ida. And at Mount Ida, they were worshiping the god Cronus, or Saturn, right? So the cult of Saturn becomes a proto-Jewish cult. That's what I mean, right? Does that kind of clarify it? And because
Ethnically, how would we categorize that? Would that go across all the different ethnic groups of current Jews, or was that only adhere to Ashkenazis, or it's the
yeah? I mean, it's a religious thing, so
so it's not an ethnic thing.
It is both. It's an ethnic and religious thing.
Okay, so
I mean, the religion actually has a kind of design that
it's
you know,
also ethnic
remarkably
as
enough,
well.
allows a
Yeah.
kind of the retaining of a kind of racial type.
Absolutely, but what you're saying is the people that were in these ancient cults in these completely different regions followed this ethnic line and became what we know today as, say Ashkenazi or Sephardim or
Yeah, they
that's kind of
became they became present day Jews, and you know, in the Hebrew Bible, actually, this is a kind of thing that you wouldn't really kind of you would guess that, like, oh, maybe they invented all these, you know, because when they appear on the stage of history, it's sort of after they've kind of had all these adventures in the Hebrew Bible, or some portion of the adventures in the Hebrew Bible. But Abraham hails from Ur in Sumer. And so there you see, in other words, in the Hebrew Bible, they show Jews coming from this kind of first civilization in Sumer. And I think that that's actually 100% credible. But I don't think at that time that they were called Jews. You know,
well,
they
of
just
course
weren't.
not. No,
Yeah.
yeah, no, they were.
So,
Yeah,
so I think you understand what I'm saying, right?
no, absolutely. Yeah, I get that they didn't have the moniker Jews, so that was
Yeah,
added later
I
on.
would think a
But they
better
are more distinct people.
I think a better moniker would probably be like Proto Levantine, because how many other peoples have came out of that root of this Proto Jew that you're talking about? Like, you talk about these Sumerians that came out and became Proto Jews. How many other people branched off of them? Yeah, in your theory.
Well, no, so I argue that this is, Jews are they're a very kind of unique tribe, right? So, in other words, when I say proto-Jew, I'm not saying Semitic, right? Or what you were saying, proto, which, so I think what you're saying is that why not just call them Semitic as opposed to proto-Jew? The reason I call them proto-Jew is because I think that religiously, and in the way that they interact with civilizations, they behave in very similar manners, right? And we see this, for example, in cults where, to return again to the cult of Saturn on Crete, there it's an expulsion story, right? It's the story of Jupiter throwing Cronus out. This reoccurs in the cult of Vulcan, which in my mind is clearly a proto-Jewish cult. And there also you see Vulcan thrown out to Lemnos by Jupiter, Lemnos or Lemnos. And that Lemnos becomes the seat of the cult of Vulcan, or Hephaestus, as the Greeks called him. So those would be examples of kind of proto-Jewish cults, if you will. And yeah.
Okay.
Anyways, any other questions?
Yeah, so I actually want to expound upon. So you're not saying that these mountain proto-Jews from Mount Ida that were actually part of the Saturn cult actually physically went into Germanic lands. What you're proposing is that due to the descendants of these proto-Jews, their descendants' influence upon the Roman system, and then the Roman system is an expression of their influence, which then later influenced the Germanic people. So it's like,
he did specifically talk about shamans going around and
Yeah, well, see, I mean, think about it, Rory. I think that someone would have to be convinced of these gods, right? You would have to admit. So, in other words, maybe we can agree that the transmission of Norse mythology in some ways would resemble the transmission of Christianity, in the sense that at some point there would have to be a priest or something who would be convincing people of the existence of these gods, right?
Well, that works on a local level, like within, small cities or larger cities. And then once a cult gets a following, then it spreads out. Yeah. But
no, yeah. And I
that
argue
only works over a smaller region.
I mean, that's if you view religion in the universalist lens. We don't. Also true, we don't view it as in the universalist lens.
Well, we were kind of more speaking about Christianity.
I know. No, what he's referring to is that there would have to be some sort of shaman to come around to these people, the Germanic peoples, and teach them the Germanic mythology. He's denying the idea that it organically came up out of those people.
Yeah, I would deny that. I mean, certainly to the extent that it resembles Norse mythology as we know it today, I would certainly deny that.
So you're saying that Are you saying that the Norse people were taught, or were you saying that
They
the
had,
original?
someone had to teach. Like even if you take the position that it is an Aryan derived religion, and
Which
it
it
was
is.
Aryans that created the religion, then you would also have to obviously accept that there were priests or shaman who were teaching the religion to other Aryans.
Or it was carried along with migration and evolved with the different people.
I think that's the thing that I kind of go back to is it's a lot more. It seems a lot more simple, and with the natural flow of people, linguistics, and cultures as they
Yeah.
expand out, that we're all coming from a similar place. When you would take these myths with you, and they would evolve over time. Well, the Jews and the proto-Jews, if you will, would have came from the same regions. So of course they would have taken those same mythos with them. And so you would see these same mythos to expand out as these cultures go, and they would form and twist and change over time, over multiple generations of word of mouth. I don't see the reason to inject the necessary this unnecessary shamans walking around teaching people when there's already a natural flow of people out of a central region.
Yeah.
It seems unnecessary to add that extra step.
Yeah, that it came out of a central area and then went back and like retaught them. Now, this is the reason I brought up the universalist thing, because when you look through the universalist lens, as is Christianity and Islam and Buddhism and universalist, when you look through the universalist lens, you view spiritual philosophy as something that anybody can just reach out and grab. It can be taught to anybody. It's just transient, fluid thing that anybody can do. When you understand folk religion and you understand folk philosophy and spiritual stuff, this is something that's ingrained in our ethnos, that's ingrained in our culture, which is an expression of our ethnos. This is something that's interwoven with us and evolves as you go to different areas and you migrate and stuff, and language changes. Obviously, the name of Odin is going to change across different cultures as the peoples migrated and moved to different areas. It's going to change as language changes. However, the god remains the same. And it's because folk religion is organically born out of the folkish, the ethnic soul of that specific people.
All right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I've laid out my case.